So hello, everybody. My name is Niall Roche. I'm speaking here on behalf of the Accord project. I'm actually a member of Mishcon de Rea, which is a law firm in London, and also part of UCL's Centre for Blockchain Technologies. So I'm at the UCL School of Management. That's University College London. I know many of you from the US on this one, so maybe you're not familiar with the acronym. So from the Accord project, we have maybe some of you are familiar with it. I'm not sure the speaker list. I haven't had a chance to look through, but it's an open source legal technology project, and the idea is to solve some of the problems that have already been addressed in some of the earlier talks, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So it's an open initiative. We have members from all over the different time zones. Obviously, one of the last speakers from Australia. We have an active development community in Australia, and actually some of the technology behind this is in a startup that's active in Melbourne, in the Victoria region, for real estate. So we have mostly US based, but quite an active user group in India as well. And a number of law firms and other organizations who have signed up for interest. And we have quite a large development community as well. And our technology working group call is quite active every week, along with some of the other working groups as well. So just start with the obvious one, which we won't spend too much long, because obviously this is a domain where a number of the participants are fairly familiar. So what is a smart legal contract? And it means different things to different people. But from the perspective of the Accord project, at least, a smart legal contract is a human readable and machine readable document. So it consists of both the natural language component and computable components. And I know a lot of the earlier conversation that I caught the tail end of there was around natural language processing. The project itself doesn't address that. It doesn't try to do any NLP out of the box. However, we have had some experiments with that. So we have one of the participants who's joined the call, actually, Eason, worked with us on a project as part of Google Summer of Code to try to use natural language processing to identify some of the terms in the contracts and to automatically transform some of that into technology, where I'll be talking a little bit more about that in a moment. But I wouldn't say it's a complete end-to-end AI solution, and I would agree with some of the discussion in the previous session about how difficult that is in practice. But there are some quick wins and sort of easy lifting to be done, I think. But full transition from smart legal. From legal documents into AI composable and understandable documents, I think is something that is a long way off. So really what we're trying to do here is have a document that is readable by a human and also in some way processable by technology without just reading the raw natural language, but have some structure around the document as well, and to be able to execute certain parts of the agreement as well. So it's not trying to take the entire document, read it, and execute it. We will look at the distinction and how that works. Obviously, there's a number of different ways that this can happen, and different ways, different approaches that different projects follow. So I'm just going to go through the 3-stage process of the Accord project and focus in on Ergo, which is the executable business logic, which is what the main structure of the paper was about. But in order to do that, I just want to set the scene for the Accord project in general. So we have different terminology. We've got Cicero, Ergo, and Concerto. Okay, so it's sometimes a little bit hard to get your head around without understanding the difference between the two. So we're going to jump into an example fairly quickly to make that distinction between those 3 concepts pretty quickly. And we have not just the language environment, but we also have an active developer community, both on the tech side and on the legal side, because we want to try to create as many open source templates as possible. So we have examples up there from a range of different jurisdictions and also from different types of problems that our users are trying to solve. So loan agreements, late delivery, and penalty clauses, things like this. We also have a reusable model library as well, so we'll get to that. So Concerto is the first sort of glue between the natural language environment, which we'll look back at, and Ergo itself, which is the programming implementation. So it's designed to build a domain model that's agnostic really to any language. It's not bound into any particular language. We have bindings where this can be loaded into JavaScript and Java and embedded in different blockchain platforms as well. So it's a data definition language using a schema language. That's pretty simple to define a hierarchy of concepts inside a contract. They could be at a clause level or at a contract level, and it has high-level data types for things like currencies, dates, times, the kind of common things that contracts need to reason about. And it's a rich set of library. People are adding to it all the time. So you're not starting from scratch when you're modeling a contract. You try to reuse as much as possible from existing libraries. So Cicero is the template language. So this is normally where people start, the one that's a little bit easier to get your head around. And that's effectively, like many contract management solutions, looking for variables inside the contract, which are then substituted into data types that are defined by Concerto. And we'll look at some examples of that in a little while. But Ergo, the programming language, is what makes this actually possible from an executable perspective. One controls the structure, Ergo controls the implementation of that agreement. So Ergo, we'll jump into it in a little bit more detail. First of all, I'd like to just thank my co-authors on this and really say that Jerome, who unfortunately really, I guess, should be presenting this paper because I take no credit for it. Jerome is the brains, the soul behind Ergo. The Accord project in general would not be possible without Jerome, and he's the implementer of Ergo and the most active maintainer of the project. So it's a pity he's unwell tonight to present, but I will try to do my best on his behalf. But he's the brains behind it. We'll jump into some more examples, but this one here, it might be a little bit difficult to see on the screen, but it's looking at when something was agreed to be delivered, when it was actually delivered, and then a very simple comparison for seeing something delivered, say, before it was due to be delivered. So it's a sort of a validation check to see, well, let's enforce these preconditions before we get any further into the contract, and it can throw a failure condition. So there's a lot of checking, a lot of boundary conditions that you might expect with these types of things. So don't execute anything until you've verified that everything is exactly as it should be before you do any calculations. And we'll see some more examples of that. So again, the smart legal contract in the Accord world is a combination of these three elements: the model, the text, and the logic. So Ergo is the logic piece, and again, the model was on the Concerto side, and we have different grammar languages within Cicero as well for writing templates. So it's not just a sort of a mail merge as such, it is about assembling smart documents, and we have a blog post which kind of looks at this in far more depth that we'll be able to cover in a short talk. So I suggest you have a look at that. But let's jump into some examples, because I think that will help to make things a little bit more concrete and really understand what we're talking about. So we're going to zone in on one example, the late delivery and penalty, which I showed a small little section of there earlier. So we have the concept of the parties to the agreement, the buyer and the seller. And then we're looking at a percentage penalty if a particular type of good is late. And then we have the concept of durations, percentages, and other aspects in there. So it's got support for currencies and the concept of delay as well. So delay can be months, minutes, seconds, smaller units than that as well. And obviously, when it comes to computable contracts, these types of things are really very useful, because in many cases, it's somebody did not do something by a certain period of time. One example I've worked on using this in the past was a proof of concept with the UK Land Registry around writing clauses that if somebody hadn't paid the remaining amount for their house by a certain time in the UK, it's 2 p.m., then there's a certain defined set of penalty actions that can happen. So these types of things pop up all the time in contracts. So we have those more or less at the top level element in the project, the concept of durations, percentages, and currencies as well. So if you kind of tie those three together, we would see an extract of the Cicero example here, which is the contract with the template variables, then the binding of those variables into Concerto. So we'll see there it's a fairly simple syntax. It's sort of it's language agnostic really. So we've got the concept of a party, a monetary amount, so the cost of the goods, and any delivery fee if that's available as well. And then in Ergo we have that extract from the error checking in that case. I'll skip over this at the moment because it's more related to Concerto really, but it might be a little bit hard to see this, but I've tried to pull in the important parts of what that Ergo implementation would look like. We've seen some of it, but it has the concept of emitting, well, there's a concept of variables for a start. It's down here at the bottom, you can start to see an obligation. So we can emit an obligation from the contract, which is a fairly new concept from traditional programming languages. So this clause is executed, but what happens at the output of that clause? And in the case of if there's a penalty, there's generally some type of payment obligation where one party owes one or more other parties a certain monetary amount. And again, that can be different currencies, can be cryptocurrencies potentially as well. And potentially there's a deadline that's been defined in the contract as well. So party A owes party B a certain amount of defined monetary amount, and it must be paid by a certain period of time. Now, the Accord project itself doesn't go into did that payment happen. That's up to the implementation of whatever is behind this. So maybe monitoring blockchain transactions, maybe monitoring actual bank transactions as well. And some of the companies involved in the Accord project have built extensions that are proprietary and part of their business stack as well to do that type of integration. But it's not natively defined within the organization itself, or sorry, within the project itself. That's just an example of what that output's like. It's just a simple JSON format, and other projects can implement that. So again, you could write your own implementation that would look at the output of a smart legal contract and then take some actions. And that could be as simple as maybe an integration with an ERP system, or even just an email system, and send an email to somebody saying, actually, our contract has determined that somebody owes somebody some money, and you need to act on it. So the whole point of this is not necessarily to tie it into even a blockchain solution. It's designed to be technology agnostic. So even though your contracts are written in Ergo, Ergo can cross-compile into multiple languages, as I mentioned, with more coming. We've got some experimentation with some other languages as well. So it can run in a standalone environment. We have an implementation of this that's been kindly built by somebody in Amazon. And this is using Amazon's QLDB, their centralized append-only ledger. So it doesn't have to run on a blockchain, but we also have implementations that run on Hyperledger Fabric and also on Corda as well. So we cross-compile into JavaScript and also into JVM-based languages as well. And we're hoping to extend that more into, say, the Ethereum-based ecosystem as well. We can still have a level of integration with monitoring transactions that go on chain, for example, and then making those obligations appear back on chain. But right now, I think we'd all agree running these types of things on Ethereum with current gas prices the way they are a little bit prohibitive on public chains anyway. Obviously, there's multiple versions of Ethereum, and it can run in an enterprise capacity as well. So that's something that we're actively looking at too. But the project itself doesn't align itself with any particular implementation. We try to be as open as possible. And we are looking at alternative blockchain solutions as well, and in the broader DLT ecosystem, not just traditional blockchain solutions. And if anybody here is interested in potentially working with us on that, we would love to get some more contributions in that space as well. There's a little bit of detail here on the Ergo compiler that people may or may not want to go into, but we can do that a little bit in the Q&A if necessary. But we'll see, take the basic Ergo, it goes through a compilation phase, syntax checking, etc., and then cross-compiles into, again, the other languages that we mentioned. Quick example at the end. I won't go through this because I'm short on time, but we've had a few different people who've been working in the space. There's a startup that is in the UK called eHab. They were looking at implementing construction contracts using what's known as the NEC in the UK, which manages quite a few different types of different construction contracts. And they were looking at monitoring weather conditions using IoT sensors. And then they would run existing contract logic to figure out whether there should be a payment or a deferral of payment depending on weather conditions, for example. And it's quite a complex project. It involves very local weather conditions and very local weather sensors, so not just pulling from a traditional online source, but what is the weather in your hyper-local area with IoT sensors. So it's very open to processing external data points from the blockchain environment, what would be known as an oracle. And myself and some colleagues at Mishcon and UCL have also written a few papers around pulling these two concepts together about trusted sources of data and implementing things like COVID responsive contracts and climate responsive contracts using the Accord project as well. This was the Ergo example for that. So again, it's pulling in a lot of variables here, wind speed, and other details from those sensors, and then responding to the events as written in the contract, so that it can figure out whether it's over a threshold to be considered. In this case, well, this is potentially a serious weather event. Therefore, there's not an obligation on the constructor to actually work in those conditions as well. We have a number of other aspects to the project that I just will leave here in the presentation. I don't want to take up too much time on it, but a number of tools to help supporting our process inside Accord for creating contracts, reviewing existing models, and for syntax checking. We've got plugins, for example, for Visual Studio, VS Code these days, and existing UI components as well for authoring contracts using our React stack. So again, for syntax checking, you can use online tools. You can download Cicero, Ergo onto your local computer, Windows and Mac and Unix-based systems, and you can execute the compiler, or you can make things easy and download the VS Code extension, and that will help to do a little bit more syntax checking and integrate with an IDE. I'll skip over some of the other things. It has been used again in a number of different projects in the UK as well. The UK legal schema, which is an attempt at standardizing a lot of UK-based contracts, is using Concerto as well and Cicero. And I've added some other resources here as well for those that may be of interest, but I think I'll leave it at that point and open the floor for questions. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks so much, Niall. We have a first online question from Jason. Can Ergo be compiled to non-immutable ledger systems?
Ergo is actually very flexible. So it's in this particular case, it's cross-compiled to JavaScript and Java, as I mentioned, which can be nothing to do with blockchain. Just you can run it standalone, pass in a string of JSON, which is the input into the contract, and it will just output the output from that contract as well. So JSON in, JSON out. You could run that on a local server on your own machine. It doesn't really have any huge dependencies. You could run in a Docker container inside a server environment. Basically, that's what the Amazon example does. It runs all this using Lambda functions. So cross-compiles into JavaScript. You can deploy those into Lambda, and then the output of that is wherever you want to store the state. So it can be in a regular database. It could be in an immutable database. Something like QLDB from Amazon, again, is a trusted immutable database. It's centralized. You can trust Amazon to maintain that state for you. Or you could, again, write it onto any DLT system. So we're looking at things like, well, again, I mentioned Hyperledger and Corda, of which we have some sample implementations. And we're looking at some other DLT-based solutions as well. So Hedera Hashgraph is something that we're looking at working with as well. But again, very open to working on other platforms, whether that's just something cloud-based like, I don't know, Microsoft Azure, running the same kind of thing in Azure Functions would be perfectly fine. I can't see any potential issues there, really.
All right, we have one last question from the room.
Hi. So you probably just answered these questions. So I'm very curious about your example about 110 penalty example, because you seem to have double but not the integer. Is that because you want to support the JavaScript backend?
I need to check on that one, on the example. Make sure I've copied the right one in as well. So this is the late delivery and penalty. It wasn't the Ergo example here. I guess it was the original one. Let me have a quick look back at this.
No, you missed it. 3 slides right.
Oh, probably it's not this one then. No, it's the.
Keep moving forward. I think it's about 3 slides forward from this.
Sorry, forward, not back. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I think sorry. Yes, the other way, isn't it? Sorry. It's back from where I was, I guess, but forward in the presentation.
Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry. Let's have a look.
The one, yeah. Sorry, no, the other one that has the 110.00001 in it.
Apologies, it'll be this one. One more.
Yes, yes.
110 obligation. I think that is. Oh, you mean the trailing 0001 on it, or do you mean why it's gone to 110? Well, I guess it depends on what the input was in this case. So this may also be because it was a cap. In this particular case, what happens is you can also specify this. It's a bit hard to see there as well. So even if the contract indicated that it was very, very late, it was a year late or something, and that would lead to a very high penalty. In this case, you can also have a capped amount as well. So depending on the input that's passed in, sometimes there is a fixed amount, depending on the value of the goods from memory, but you can obviously tweak it as you wish on that one. So that may be why high inputs sometimes give you out the same output, because that's what it says in the contract. And again, that's something that you could make configurable in the contract text. Even in the text itself, you can have optional components within the template itself. So it's as if it kind of runs a little bit of Ergo inside the natural language. So you can have conditional concepts inside the body of the text, and you can choose. I mean, it's the kind of thing we can. If it's something simple like a few conditional pieces of logic, you can do it inside the text. But if it's anything far more complex, it's far better done inside Ergo if there's a lot of different considerations within there.
All right, we're running a little late, so let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.
Niall, you have one last question in the Q&A that
Okay.
maybe you can answer asynchronously in the chat. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and we will restart the last session of the day. Thanks.